Hey everyone, it's Sauce, and today I want to talk about how I deal with periods and birth control while backpacking. It's definitely something I've had a few friends ask me about when I talk about my backpacking trips, so I have to assume that it's something that most people would like to know who are just starting or have never been backpacking before. I'm going to share what works for me, but also share a little bit about what I've heard work for other people as well, because this definitely isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. I'll also touch on birth control specifically in regards to thru-hikes, so if that's something that you're curious about, be sure to stick around until the end. I also want to acknowledge that people have different levels of symptoms and severity when it comes to dealing with periods. So if you're someone who deals with something like endometriosis or PCOS, your experience will obviously be very different from mine, and I just want you to take from this video what works for you and leave what doesn't. I will say though, if you're feeling discouraged about it, I do know people who thru-hike with those conditions and they make it work, so it's definitely possible. First, I want to talk about how to choose products for your period while backpacking. As you likely already know, there are several options for period products that we get to choose from in everyday life, and those each have different things to consider when you're going backpacking. So there's tampons, cups, pads, period underwear, etc. I'm going to kind of go through each one and talk about what I prefer and what you need to do if you're going to bring them backpacking. As far as what I would recommend for the actual products you're using to deal with your period while backpacking, I would say to use whatever works best for you while you're at home. If you use a menstrual cup at home, for example, go ahead and continue to use it backpacking. But if you use tampons at home, that's what I would recommend also bringing with you on your backpacking trips. I will go a little more in depth about each of the options in this video, but my personal preference would be tampons or menstrual cups. Tampons I use specifically are the OB organic tampons, and I mostly prefer those because they create a lot less trash. They don't have an applicator, so the only trash that you end up packing out with them is the tiny little plastic wrapper that they come in, and then the tampon itself once you're done with it. I like cups for the same reason. It's even less waste. I've talked to a lot of people who've done this, and I've definitely done it myself, and is making the mistake of switching to a menstrual cup for backpacking before thoroughly testing it at home. This can cause a lot more problems than it solves. I think if you're anything like me, I wanted to have no waste from my period, and so I was like, great, I'll switch to a menstrual cup, but because I wasn't really fully adapted to it, it just made kind of more issues for me than it solved. Because of that, I would recommend using a menstrual cup for several months before you leave for a backpacking trip to make sure that you have the right fit and that you're comfortable using it. I personally, unfortunately, have not yet found a cup that works for me, so until I do, I'll be sticking to tampons. So in summary, again, use what works best for you at home. And if you want to change it up for backpacking, just make sure to test it out for a couple months before you leave. And with that, I want to talk about the overview and sort of procedure that you would use for each product while backpacking. So for tampons and pads, the important thing to know about pads and tampons is that you have to pack them out just like you would any other bathroom trash. Some people do prefer to bring a specific bag to put their period waste in so that it kind of gives them a little bit of privacy compared to like the typical Ziploc trash bag that backpackers use. For me, instead of packing specific bags, I usually just try and find something to hide my tampons inside of within my trash bag. Other than that, using tampons and pads in the backcountry is pretty straightforward. I'll go over hygiene a little bit later in the video. Cups, on the other hand, are a little bit trickier than tampons as far as the way that you need to dispose of the waste, but they do ultimately result in less trash, which some people prefer, especially if they are already using a cup at home. Basically, you have to dispose of menstrual waste the same way that you would dispose of number 2 in any given area. So whatever the regulations are for pooping in the wilderness area that you're visiting is the same thing that you would apply to your menstrual cup waste. So if you're in an area where it's okay to bury your poop, this would mean walking 200 feet away from any trails or water sources, digging a hole at least 6 to 8 inches deep, and that is where you would dump your menstrual cup. If you're in an area that requires the use of wag bags, then you need to put your menstrual waste in a wag bag and pack it out. Also, if you're familiar with menstrual cups, you know that you can boil them to sanitize them, and that's the best way to get them clean. This can obviously be done in town, or if you need to clean your cup while you're out on the trail, you can obviously use your backpacking stove and pot for that. And again, for a little extra effort, you don't have to pack out any tampons, which is kind of nice. I've also heard from some people that they cramp less when they use menstrual cups, so it might be worth a shot if you're someone who deals with really bad cramps. Next up is period underwear. I know people love period underwear, and this is not me knocking it at all, but I don't know if it's the best choice for backpacking. If someone has firsthand experience with it and wants to let me know in the comments or let other people know in the comments, please do. But mostly my aversion comes from the washing process and the length of trips that I personally typically do. If you're doing shorter trips or like a single overnight, it honestly might be a perfect solution. So like I said, my biggest issue with period underwear would be the washing process. If you need to wash it while you're on a backpacking trip. You have to go at least 200 feet away from any trails or water sources and bring the water with you. And then you also have to use biodegradable soap. This is true for any sort of backcountry laundry that you might be doing, because even biodegradable soap is hard on the fragile alpine water ecosystem. You should never be using it directly in the water source. So that right away is kind of a pain in the butt. Then you also have to have backup products while you let the period underwear dry, which I imagine, because of its absorbent nature, might take quite a while. So I would imagine if you're on like a 3 or 4 day trip, you might need 3 or 4 pairs of underwear. Personally, I think I'd have to be carrying too many pairs and doing too much backcountry laundry to make it worth it. Another very important aspect of dealing with your period while backpacking is sanitation. Obviously, we are not quite as clean as we are used to in the backcountry, so it's important to get your hands as clean as possible, especially if you're using a cup or a tampon without applicators. Personally, I will usually rinse my hands with my filtered water just to get all of the dirt off of my hands as much as possible. If I have extra baby wipes, which I do try to carry if I know I'm gonna be on my period, I'll also use those to wipe my hands off. And then I use hand sanitizer to make sure that my hands are as sanitized as possible. And then I repeat all of those things after changing my tampon. Also, I'm sure to keep my tampon in my first aid and hygiene kit, since that doesn't really ever touch the ground or outside world, to keep my tampons and things as clean as possible. Another important thing to remember when dealing with your period while backpacking is that it's always smart to bring extra. I always keep a few extra tampons in my first aid kit, even if I'm not on my period, just in case, and that's great to have for other people in case they need them as well. If I have the option, like on a shorter trip instead of a thru hike, I'll also bring a pair of extra underwear just in case. Another huge aspect of dealing with your period while backpacking is obviously dealing with the discomfort that can come with that. Again, everyone is different, but I often deal with nausea, cramping, and pretty bad leg pain, which is perfect for backpacking, right? For some people, you might find that your period even gets lighter on long backpacking trips, like on thru hikes, but that is not the case for everyone. There are a few different methods I use to deal with period-related pain while backpacking, and a lot of it is similar to what I do at home. So the first thing is something like ibuprofen or Midol. I usually take ibuprofen at home, and it helps a lot with my cramps, and so that's usually what I also take on trail. Second, I will lower my mileage. If my period is giving me a tough time, I don't need to do a 30 that day, and hopefully your trail family or whoever you're hiking with will be understanding of that as well, if that's something that's important to you. But overall, don't feel like you need to tough it out. Just give yourself a break. Your body is going through a lot. Third, that is sort of related to that, is that I am not afraid to take a midday nap while I'm on my period. Sometimes that's really all that is going to get me through an afternoon, so I'm not afraid to lay out my foam pad and take a little bit of a rest. Whatever works well for you at home is probably what's going to work well for you on the trail, so try and give yourself accommodations as close to that as you possibly can. Finally, I want to touch on the topic of birth control while on trail, because I know that was a huge question that I had when I was going on my first thru hike. This won't be as relevant for shorter backpacking trips, but you might still get some helpful information from it. Of course, I am not a doctor, so please talk to your doctor about what is best for you health-wise. I just want to go over some considerations for taking birth control while thru hiking and what has worked for me. First, I want to talk about IUDs and implants. Obviously, an IUD or an implant is a very thru-hiking friendly birth control solution, because once it's in, you don't have to really deal with it anymore. You don't have to worry about picking up prescriptions on trail or carrying them with you or taking a pill at a certain time every day. It's just kind of a, once you get it, lay back and let it work kind of thing. It also means you won't really have to worry about insurance covering your birth control while on trail, because you already have it. The one thing I would advise about IUDs and implants from a thru hiking perspective is just to try and get them as early before your thru hike as possible. That way you know how your body is going to react to them, and you give your body some time to adjust, so you're not dealing with maybe some of the side effects that you might initially get while you're on a thru hike. Also, if you find out that you end up needing to take it out, I imagine that would be difficult and sort of unfortunate to have to deal with on a thru hike. So if you get it earlier before you leave, you can kind of deal with any of those issues that might come up before you're out on trail and having to go to an unfamiliar doctor and things like that. I think a birth control pill is probably one of the best backup options besides IUDs, because you can refill them at pharmacies along the way or have backstock for someone at home to send them to you. They also will likely kind of survive in your pack and maybe do okay in a variety of temperatures, but you should of course check the label and make sure that you're not going to be in any temperatures that are too extreme for the pill. The only issue here would be making sure you can get refills on whatever insurance you'll be using while you're out on trail. I also have heard of some people getting their doctors to write advanced scripts for a variety of different medications when they know they're going to be going on a long distance through hike, so that is an option for you as well. Personally, I use a ring as my birth control because that is what I've found to work best with my body over time, but it does pose a few additional challenges while on a through hike, although it's not impossible. I use a NuvaRing or the generic version specifically, like I said, just because that's what I found to work best with my body over time. And if I don't use it, I unfortunately get extremely painful cramps, so it's kind of a necessity for me while through hiking. Typically, I get 3 months worth at a time, so 3 rings. NuvaRing can be stored at room temperature for up to 4 months, and after that, it needs to be refrigerated, but it can't be in any sort of extreme temperature. So if you're using this method, you definitely want to keep an eye on how long it's been stored and probably not carry your backups with you on trail. The way I got around this was by filling my prescription before I left for my through hike and then leaving the extras at home with my family. And I would time it so that I would ask them to send it to me and hope that it stayed at basically room temperature through the mail and pick it up from the post office in order to get my birth control. Sometimes this did mean messing up my schedule by a few days. As far as like when I typically take it, that was worth it to me in order to have it. You could also potentially just refill 1 month at a time at pharmacies along the trail if you're able to do that with your insurance. Finally, I know that dealing with your period while backpacking can be an intimidating aspect of starting your backpacking journey. It's definitely not as easy as dealing with it at home, and if you want to plan your first couple backpacking trips around that time of the month, I don't blame you, and that's a totally valid option. I do promise though that you'll eventually get used to it and it'll feel just like peeing or pooping in the woods and packing out your TP. If you're worried for some reason about how the people around you will react, which I have heard is a concern from people before, just remember that it would be weird for them to be weird about it. Periods are natural, so if anyone is going to give you a hard time about it, tell them to F off. Don't let your period be something that stops you from experiencing the adventures of a lifetime. Please feel free to leave any questions you have for me in the comments, or if anyone else has any tips that they'd love to share, please leave those as well. And thank you for watching.